Wow. You were just listening to the fabulous Mitch Frohman playing along with Tito Puente in Orchard Park. Not only is he a great saxophone player, he's a great flutist, as you just heard. Okay? Bronx native Mitch Frohman is one of the top saxophone flutists in the music scene. He went on to, after graduating from Columbus High School in the Bronx, he went on to get his Bachelor of Music Education degree from the University of Miami, class of 1975. His versatility in different styles of music has led him to many opportunities of playing with the greatest musicians in the world, including 6 Grammy Award-winning records and numerous Grammy, Latin Grammys, and Billboard nominations. I'll tell you a quick story about Mr. Frohman before I bring him on, because I know he's very busy, and my co-host Eileen Torres is very busy as well. I have thrown events all over the world, and this is not about me. I'm just saying, I've thrown huge events, and one of my top 5 events that I ever been involved with was DCBX number 11. I had the privilege of introducing Mitch Frohman and the Eddie Torres Orchestra and Eddie Torres. That was one of the biggest and best parties that I ever had. I mean, you know, I love that big band mambo, and this guy played with the best big band mambos in the game. So without further ado, I'm going to bring out my co-host Eileen Torres and Mitch Frohman. Eileen, how are you today?
Doing great. Glad to be back, and happy to be interviewing Mitch, who just reminded me of how he thinks we first met. So, Mitch, tell that story, please.
Well, it sounds salacious, but it's actually very innocent. I was just joking with Earl. The first time we met, I slept over her house. Now, let me back up. She had hired the Spanish Harlem Orchestra to do a concert in Washington, D.C. And we had, after the concert, we had about, 5, 6, 7 hours before our flight. We were on tour going somewhere else. So instead of like just spending it at the airport or just like, sleeping in our dressing room, she invited about 7, 8, or 9 of us over to kind of have just a layover, just to crash on her couch, her living room. There was half the band was there. And so everything was very clean and safe. And she gave us some refreshments. And she was the promoter. And we crashed at her house until we left in the morning to go to the airport to our next gig.
Yeah.
Interesting how things, now I remember it. It slipped my mind for a while, but you bring it all back. I think we all went out to eat in Georgetown first, and then we came back and everybody just crashed, woke everybody up, went to the airport. I think you guys were going to Europe, if I remember correctly.
Something I know. Then we'd probably, because we had luggage and everything, so it would have been a hassle to just kind of like maybe the airport might not have even been open like at 3 in the morning.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, it all worked out.
It all worked out.
Okay, let's begin at the beginning. When and where were you born, and where did you grow up?
Okay, technically, I was born in New Jersey, but I'm not from New Jersey. My father, I'm from the Bronx. My parents were living in the Bronx. My father was in the Army. He was drafted in 1952 in the Korean War. I was born in 1954. He was at the Army camp in Fort Dix, New Jersey. And I guess the day my mother gave birth to me, she was with him at the Army camp. And so I was born in Fort Dix Army Hospital. And then I guess a couple of days later, I was back in, Pelham Parkway, Bronx. And so, but on my birth certificate, it says Fort Dix Army Hospital, New Jersey. But I grew up I'm from the Bronx.
So, and you grew up in the Bronx?
Yeah, my parents, their whole lives in the Bronx, just different neighborhoods. But I grew up in the Bronx, and I live in, in New York, in the city now. But my whole life up through college, I grew up in the Bronx.
Okay, and I'm always curious to know what music you listened to as an adolescent and as a teenager. What were you listening to? What was catching your ears on the airwaves?
Well, you're listening to everything that is being played at that time. And at that time on AM radio, they were playing like, it wasn't like FM radio. Well, now it's not even radio, but Motown was played, rock was playing. I remember at 10 years old, I was at my grandparents' house on Tremont Avenue between Webster and the Concourse, seeing the Beatles, like on a Sunday night dinner with my grandparents. But listening to everything, I mean, I wasn't immersed in Latin music like, say, some of my peers who grow up in predominantly Hispanic households, but I traveled through all different neighborhoods in the Bronx and in New York playing sports on different teams. And, I had friends from all backgrounds. So I was familiar with who Tito Puente was, who Joe Cuba was, who Machito was, and of course the Beatles, the Grateful Dead, the Rolling Stones, the Temptations, the Four Tops, the Spinners. I mean, I'm leaving out a thousand, Marvin Gaye. I'm leaving out thousands of others, and then of course, starting to play the saxophone in junior high school, then listening to, whether it's John Coltrane or Charlie Parker. I mean, I think one of the first saxophone records I ever got was King Curtis doing a version of Watermelon Man and Misty.
Wow.
Do either of you guys know a Suti Khomeini?
A who?
Suti Khomeini.
Suchi Kurniati.
Yeah.
That's my fiance.
Oh, I'm sorry. She was trying to get in. I'm like, who in the world is that?
Yeah, but she's just. I think she's trying to get into listen. She's in Indonesia right now.
Oh, okay. Well, welcome.
Oh.
Because she's not saying anything, though. Well,
No. I think I sent her the wrong link. I sent her the link that Eileen sent me. I thought that was just for people to listen.
No, that was for your link.
Hi, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, Suchi, you have to turn this off, and it's the wrong link.
No, she can stay on here.
Okay. I thought that was a link for people to listen, so I sent it to a few people.
She can hear us, right?
No.
Oh, she can't hear us. Oh.
Well, how does she hear that?
How does she hear that?
1 minute. Let me. One
Good.
second.
Okay, while he's taking care of that,
Embarrassing.
we're going to delve into something that I found fascinating about Mitch because, well, first of all,
Yes, I hear.
you can hear good.
Good.
Nice to hear your voice. I've met you a few times, and good to hear your voice, and glad to know you're joining us tonight. Mitch, tell us how you started playing saxophone. Did you choose it, or was it thrust upon you?
I don't remember if in junior high school when I made band class, and I don't remember if I chose it or they said we need a saxophone player, or they said what it was.
Mm-hmm.
I truthfully don't remember if like you want to play trumpet, saxophone, violin, flute. I don't remember if it was kind of like pushed towards me or I chose it. I think maybe I chose it out of a group of instruments, but I don't remember.
Uh-huh. And when you were in junior high, how into learning and practicing were you?
Well, okay. I was. Let me shut this thing off. If I was into learning and I was into practicing, but I was still into not like 1,000%. As I mentioned before, like sports was my first love, and I play in leagues, the baseball league, basketball, football, like leagues on the weekends and practice during the week. So it wasn't 1,000%. I'm 12, 13, 14 years old. Those are the years that no child, unless they're like, I don't know, maybe like a virtuoso prodigy, even then, no child should just focus on one thing. Those are the things where you want to try to do everything and see where things lead. But
fun for you was sports.
I mean, music was fun too, but sports was my first love. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, I found that's so interesting. When did you get your first professional gig?
My first professional gig I was at the University of Miami, and a lot of the they had like the advanced students were like pros that they would it was almost like a farm system for the bands of Maynard Ferguson and Stan Kenton and Buddy Rich and Woody Herman, and I had quit music like after junior high school, so like I took it back up in college, so I was kind of starting over again. So it was, I think, in my senior year, as I got a New Year's Eve. No, I'm not sure if it was New Year's Eve or as an add-on at the Fontainebleau Hotel in my senior year, where they just needed another, young person that would play for cheap, and it was either at the Fontainebleau Hotel in like an orchestra backing up somebody, or it was a New Year's Eve at before like South Beach became like what it is, when it was mainly like horror. It was like old people, predominantly Jewish hotels in the South Beach area, and playing a New Year's Eve with a piano player, just playing like tunes like "Hello Dolly" and "Fly Me to the Moon" and "Take the A Train," just for some of the residents of the the hotel, like long-term residents that lived in these elderly hotels, for the people that weren't that rich, that could afford the condominiums and all the other things in North Miami Beach.
And so, did you have a surprising first big break that led you toward the path that you've been on all these years?
Well, there's a couple of big breaks. I mean, I guess the first big break was joining Tito Puente's band and making that connection. That was like my first steady gig, and that was at the top of the food chain. But
how did that come about?
Okay, well, after I graduated college and came back from Miami, Florida, and came back home to the Bronx, I got a gig that first summer in the Catskill Mountains, which known as the Borscht Belt, about 2 hours north of New York City, and there was still a scene there. And I was also playing at I think the name was called Zucker's Lodge. It was also an elderly people's like summer hotel or like bungalow colony. Also playing with a piano player, playing "Hello Dolly" and "Take the A Train" and "Fly Me to the Moon" and "Autumn Leaves" and stuff like that. I'm like 21 years old, and I had a car, and we would finish around before midnight. And down the road, about 10 minutes down the road, was the Pines Hotel, one of the big hotels, and the Joe Cuba Sextet was playing there that summer, and alternating with an American like pop swing band, and so I would go over there to hang out, and I just introduced myself to Joe, and said, I'm so and so, and I would love to get a chance to just sit in, and he was nice to me, and he let me sit in, and that was the very first time. I mean, I was familiar with Oye Como Va and things like that because Tito Puente, obviously was super famous. And then, of course, the Santana version made it even more famous. But that was the first time I ever played with a real Latin rhythm section, as opposed to a Latin rock section, an American Latin rhythm section, or a band with a conga or a bongo player in it, So it was so much fun. And he let me sit in like that summer. Like I would once or twice a week, I would go over there. And so when I came back home after the summer, besides just trying to, as a young 21-year-old musician, just trying to make contacts anywhere, to play in a rock band, to play in a rehearsal band, to get called to do a bar mitzvah or a wedding, just anything to try to support myself. I met somebody. His name is Roger Rosenberg, who's one of the great saxophone players in the world. He's been actually playing with Steely Dan for probably the last 25 years, but he was with Tito Puente and Mongo Santamaria in the early 70s. And I met him at a gig. He was playing with Lee Konitz Nanette at a jazz club on 86th Street in Manhattan. And, I'm going out to clubs, listening to music, going to jam sessions, hanging out every night just to try to get experience. And he mentioned to me that Tito is a band in the Latin field that works every night. The pay is very low, so they always need subs. And it's I'm not saying this derogatorily. I'm just saying like factually. So there's 3 saxophones in the section, an alto, tenor, and baritone, and you can use my name and introduce yourself to the boss behind the scenes, Jimmy Frisora, who started the Tito Puente Orchestra as the partners, and then really ran things behind the scenes. He was the first lead trumpet player and ran everything behind the scenes. Wow. So I found out where they were playing. I think it was somewhere up I think around 135th Street and Broadway. I'm not sure if it was the Happy Hills Casino or if I have the name right and the location, but I just found out where they were playing. And it was pre-Google internet. So and those things weren't advertised in the newspapers I was reading or the television shows that I was watching. So I did some, tracking, and I found out, and I just introduced myself. I went up one night, and Jimmy said, they were playing a lot of these American discotheques that would have Latin night during the week. One night in Queens, one night in Staten Island, one night in Brooklyn, one night in Long Island, and then they would do the typical Latin clubs on the weekends, or Wednesday at the Corso. And so he said, come out to this, place. It's not just low maintenance. And sometimes they would play 3 one-hour sets. And sometimes during the last set, sometimes Tito might leave a little early, and the band would still play for dancing. In fact, Mikey Collazo, who was the drummer, he would then move to timbales to cover Tito. Mm-hmm. And I started doing that. I would sit there for 3 hours and wait till last couple of tunes, and one of the guys would just, let me sit next to him, and he would take a break. And I started doing that, learning the routines. And maybe about after a couple of months, when the 20 other subs before me weren't available, they finally called me to do an actual subbing on a paying, and then they were calling me to sub on the alto chair and the tenor chair. And so I was basically starting to work almost as much as the regular guys, because I was subbing for a couple of guys a bunch of times a week. And that was in 1976. And I did that steady for a year. And then I think October 3rd, 1977, one of the saxophone players left, and Jimmy asked me to join the band. The lead alto player left. Mm-hmm. And so even though I was more comfortable on tenor, I knew the routines. So they asked me to join on lead alto. And he also was the guy that did the flute solos. So I don't know anything about high notes or the that much about the Latin flute. So I basically was just practicing my buns off and listening to everybody and getting a chance. I think I'm from the last generation that got a chance to learn on the gig. Because now to play in a band of that renown, you already need to know the style and really know how to play. Yeah. Tito was so famous that as long as he had some good or decent people young next to him, people came to see Tito. As long as the parts were played, that was good. But I pride myself. And so basically from 1976 till Tito passed in 2000, and then the band was able to continue for one more year till 2001. I was there for about a quarter of a century, 25 years.
Wow. Wow.
What a way to start. Basically at the top. I mean, you paid your dues waiting around to get the chance to sub at the very end, but it was so well worth it, because you came into the band that was the most famous Latin band in the world.
And before I joined, while I was subbing with Tito, and then other people see you. So that first year, I was also subbing then for the saxophone player in Charlie Palmieri's band. Wow. His name is Bobby Nelson. He's since passed away, but a wonderful saxophone flute player. And he used to call me. I subbed regularly for Charlie Palmieri. I did subbing with Machito, and I also subbed with Kako.
Wow.
And with Kako, I played it. Kako didn't work regularly, but I played with Kako and recorded an album with him. And so, because people start to see you in a certain situation, and then, they call you for other things. So while I was subbing with Tito, there were nights that I wasn't working, and so other bands were calling me.
Okay. Yeah.
Wow. So you learned from the best on the job.
Yes, and that was like I graduated with a degree in music from the University of Miami, and then even though, like I said, we got paid peanuts in the beginning, but I was getting paid peanuts, but to get my master's in this music. And you know something, we're still learning. We're still learning. There's still so much more. There's so much to learn. There's so much more to. I mean, any good musician will tell you, or any good athlete, or any good dancer or artist, when you think that you've learned it, that's when you need to stop, you know?
Yeah.
Well, I want to veer off in a little different direction because, you know, over the years, as we've spoken, this kind of stands out in my memory that you told me about your ability to be incorporated into merengue bands because you had that quick fingering that a lot of American or non-Dominicans actually could not fill that level of proficiency.
I don't want to. Okay, well, maybe then I like it was misunderstood what I said. I mean, the greatest jazz. I mean, you know, the greatest jazz musicians or classical musicians in the world have all the technical proficiency to play super rapid. You know, so it's not like that. The thing is that there's not a lot. Every musician in different fields sometimes don't feel an attraction to certain styles. Mm-hmm. In those days when I started with Tito, we would play clubs and there would be like another band, a charanga band, like also there would be a merengue band. There'd be like other bands. It wasn't like it is now where it's either salsa night or bachata night or merengue night or paso, where things were segregated musically. There was many bands and everybody just came to dance everything. And so, you know, on our breaks, maybe some of the other guys might go out for a smoke or a drink or, you know, looking at a girl or something, whatever. And, you know, there'd be Wilfrido Vargas or you know, Johnny Ventura or Millie Jocelyn and Los Vecinos or the no-name merengue band with some, and just I would check out. And the patterns that the saxophone players would play are called jaleos. It's a Jaleos. That was at a, you know, those type of figures. And just like I would check them out. And I would, you know, learn the style just like I would listen to the flute players. Since I was playing the flute solos in Tito's band, I would listen when Fajardo would be playing opposite us. Orchestra Broadway with the amazing Eddie Zervigón. Or Típica Novel with a 19-year-old Nestor Torres, or Conjunto Libre with a young Dave Valentine before he got into the jazz and the fusion music, just playing Típico, you know? And I remember somebody, you know, in those early days, I was getting called to sub in some merengue bands because there were some of the saxophone players in some of those bands, they weren't the greatest readers. They were amazing, but like if they needed somebody to just fill in one night, that like I was a good reader, and I am a good reader, and I also was familiar with the style. So I got a call to play in a bunch of different merengue bands, and it was, you know, they're good merengue. There are great merengue bands. There are not good. There are great salsa bands. There are not. There are great rock bands. Not great rock bands. It's good or bad music. So. I really, it's really helped my career. I know that I played with a bunch of merengue bands, and then I think for 6 months in the latter 80, I think about 87, I did a 6-month tour with Millie Jocelyn and Los Vecinos, which is really one of the great merengue bands of all time. Wow. And I also did some playing with Fausto Rey, and then there's a legendary. He was known as the Charlie Parker of Santo Domingo. And now I'm having a senior moment. Mario Rivera played in his big band when he was a kid. I'll think of it later. But I got a chance to play with these people when and when I play with my bands, and we play say for dancers for everybody. I throw a merengue in a set. I throw a boogaloo in a set. I throw a bolero in a set. You know, everything is not the same tempo.
Well, and that's the way it used to be, as I remember in the 70s. Every salsa band that came to town, or even their albums, everybody had a merengue, everybody had a cha-cha, everybody had a bolero. And so you had a wide gamut of music, and you just expected it. And so you would dance every single style that was played at the dance if you were into dancing.
If you could go on YouTube. We were on one of the Celia Cruz albums we did with Tito Puente. We recorded a merengue with her.
Wow.
You know, and Millie and Los Vecinos had a couple of salsa tunes in their set when they would play like.
Oh boy!
They would play for everybody. They were charanga bands would play a bolero during the set. You know, or you know. It was different then. You kind of like everything wasn't just like one way.
Yeah. Wow.
Well, and how long were you with Millie Los Vecinos? Millie Jocelyn Los Vecinos.
How old was I, or how long was I?
How long did you?
About 6 months. What happened was they had to go on tour. I think they had to go to Colombia for and one of the. It's like, this is like, the more things change, the more they say the same. One of the musicians didn't have his papers, so he couldn't leave the country.
Wow.
And they had a tour coming up really in a couple of weeks, and they needed somebody that was familiar with the style, but that didn't really they didn't have time to really rehearse, so that could really read the stuff, you know? And so I filled in, and then right after that, they went to Puerto Rico for 2 months to do the Fiesta Patronales. So I did that. We stayed at the El San Juan Towers. And then I did some more gigs with them. I mean, I still was playing with Tito, but I was sending subs to Tito because in those couple of years, Tito was also doing a small group that Martin Cohn started with Latin percussion. So there was a couple of times where we weren't working, you know? So, and then we did another tour of Colombia, and a couple of other places. And then after the 6 months, you know, then they were back to playing locally for a while, and the other guy came back in.
Wow.
So I was kind of like a hired gun. But I tell you, I really, some of those arrangements were fantastic. I know this wonderful saxophone player Juan Colon did a lot of arrangements for them, Crispin Fernandez, and really some of those arrangements were fantastic.
Wow. Yeah, the Smithsonian brought them to Washington, D.C. For a concert. It wasn't a dance, but it was a fabulous time to hear her and her group play.
Yeah.
And in those days, like you said, you would go to the Corso, or you would go to later on Club Broadway, and there would be 5 or 6 bands and a great diversity in the style and the sound.
And Eileen and Earl, sometime on Saturday nights in Brooklyn, there's a place called Casa Boninquen on Myrtle and Wyckoff, and 7 bands for $7.
Wow.
Like Tito Puente, like whether it was Tito Puente or Ray Barretto or Typica 73 or Machito, like the feature headliner. And then there would be like what were then, and I say this respectfully, considered like the B bands only because in name stature, but they're legendary. Could be Bobby Rodriguez y la Compañía, Pito Conde Rodriguez, like
Santiago Cerón.
Yeah, right. And then there would be like a merengue band, and then there would be like charanga bands, Orchestra Broadway, Charanga 76, like Typica Novell, Fajardo. And the funny thing is, the clubs wouldn't advertise what time the bands were playing. They would just say, 7 bands, Tito Puente, Ray Barretto, Typica 73, Fajardo, Millie Los Vecinos, like, Pacheco. And so the bands were doubling and tripling all on the weekends, like playing a set at one club and a set at another club. So we might play a set at 11 to 12, and then we'd go to play another club, and somebody, people would come at 12 o'clock, and they'd pay their money and find out that the band they came to see had already left. We didn't advertise what time each band was playing.
Wow.
let's talk about the first Grammy you won and how you felt being part of such an award.
Well, I mean, I can't really take credit. I mean, I it wasn't under my name, but it was with Tito Puente. I think it was one of the Benny Murray records, I think, that won the Grammy. I mean, it's thrilling. And I think you probably took the 6 Grammys from an older bio. I think I'm up to 7 now because we won in Spanish Harlem a couple of years ago. But those things are wonderful, I mean. But it doesn't define you. I don't mean you personally, but it doesn't define you. It's just it's a nice feather in the cap, and but it wasn't something that changed my life. It's good for the resume, and I'm really proud of it. I think I've gotten 4 with Tito and 3 with Spanish Harlem, and then a couple of other awards like nominations with other bands and Billboard awards, But still a lot to learn.
Wow. So, Mitch, earlier I mentioned that you and Eddie Torres and the Mambo Orchestra and Eddie Torres came down to D.C. for DCDX.
Right.
Did you have a good time down there?
It was wonderful. What was that, like 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, it was about 3 years. 2 years ago.
Well, that'd be more than 2 years ago because
3 years. 3 years.
It was wonderful, and one of the nice things, like we took the train down. So the train's a nice ride from New York to Washington, and the promoters there were very nice. I forgot their name, but they were a very nice couple.
Lee and Kat. Right.
Lee and Kat, and then we wound up taking the nucleus of the Eddie Torres band. Most of them we picked up. We because of budgetary reasons, we picked up I think 2 or 3 guys, and we played we were the feature band for the Dancing for the Salsa Congress, and then we did a little show with Eddie and his dance.
Yeah.
And that's how it used to be. Like things weren't done with tape; they were done live. I appreciate the places that still try. It costs more, but we appreciate the places that still try to keep the live entertainment going, the music and the dance, because without one, you don't have the other on both sides.
Okay, let's go into a situation where a lot of people may not be familiar with you, or if they are familiar with you, it's strictly because of Latin music. Let's play a tape where everybody can relate to the music that you have played in. Okay, that's from Sex and the City. Everybody knows that song. Okay, I didn't like the program because they didn't have any black people on there, but I love that song. I love that music. It was great.
I'm not endorsing the program. They just called me to do a recording in 1997 for something that was going to be coming out later next year. It was another gig, another jingle that I got called for, and I had no idea that something that I played and the other guys on the session played that they would use for the theme.
Right.
And when you say besides not any, even that's you can put that in the same category as Friends and a few of the other TV shows.
I do.
Right. And there was one show where they had like a white guy playing like a jazz musician, a trombone player. And the whole show, he was just going, like when he was talking to the girl, he was like talking like jive. Like it was so funny. But that being said, for some reason, that show has struck a nerve with people around the world. And that video you just saw was from a gig. I was on a solo tour of Asia, and the wonderful DJ that you interviewed a while ago, Henry Knowles, who's living in Thailand now, hooked up a gig for me in Hong Kong. And it was a local band that was a good guys. They were. I think one guy was the timbale player was from Colombia. The piano player was Cuban. The bass player was Dominican, and the conga player was from I forget which country, in West Africa. And I had to play Sex in the City 4 times that night. A version that I did on my CD that's good for dancing, because we did 2 sets, and the first set there was some media there, and I had to play it twice for the media, and the second set we played it, and then some young woman requested for me to play it again later that set. So wow. It's got legs, but I don't disagree with you about the show.
Hey Mitch, we had a party in Cozumel, Mexico, in Spanish Hurricane. I don't know whether you were playing with them at the time.
I didn't go.
Okay.
The thing is, okay. I think if my daughters are listening, then they'll find out why I didn't go, and probably my daughter will say, "Dad, you're crazy."
You remember that trip, though? You remember that event?
Well, there was a couple of trips I didn't go on.
Uh-huh.
I either had another gig, but I think. Do you remember what year that was? And I could tell you.
I can't remember, Mitch. I just know when the band came on.
Was it before 2007, 2008?
It might have been. It might have been after that.
Okay, because
it might have been 2008. I can't remember.
Okay, because one of my daughters was an athlete also, and played a year of professional basketball in the women's professional league in Puerto Rico, and I flew down there to see her play a couple of times, and so there was a couple of gigs that I didn't do because money you can replace, but the experiences with your children you can never replace. So, yeah. So I didn't miss a game.
Yeah, it was a great event, but like you said, you didn't miss too much. So, Mitch, we want to try to show a different side of you that doesn't have anything to do with music. If we can get this, if I can get this video straight, bear with me and let me see what's going on. Okay. Here. Earl. Oh, shucks.
You gotta go from the beginning. You just shut the volume off, but you got to go back to the beginning. But it's got a screen. And now go back to the beginning. Now it seems like I want people to see.
Okay. All right. That was Mitch wrestling with a luchador, famous luchador.
No, luchador.
Luchador. And that's funny because I watch wrestling a lot too, and I've missed enough.
Yeah, it was. I like to work out, and I've always been a big wrestling fan, and we were on a trip. Well, we've been with Spanish Harlem. We were playing a concert in Mexico City at this club called La Maraca. I think it was in, I forget, 2012, 2013 or whatever. And there was a band that was opening for us. And the band was El Gran Apache y sus Gladiadores. And I seen him. El Gran Apache is a legendary luchador who was, at that point, semi-retired, but he was still wrestling. And he was one of the top trainers in the world. And his wife, his ex-wife, was this a famous wrestler, Lady Apache, and he has 2 daughters, Fabi and Maria Apache, who are famous women luchadors. And I had seen him on Spanish TV in New York, and I mean, he's like a legendary wrestler. And so he had a band because he was like an aspiring like a salsa cumbia singer. And he had a routine where he had like a band and he would sing, and he had 3 female coro singers, but they were really student wrestlers of his training. And the rest of the band would be wearing the luchador masks, you know, and a plant from the audience would come up on stage and make like he's flirting with the female choral singers, and then they would jump off the stage like on a wooden floor from a high stage, and then fight, while the band is still vamping and playing. It was hilarious. It was great. So, and they're throwing each other around, but not on the mats. This is like the wooden floor of the ballroom, and so. I took some pictures with him after the show, and I told him, I was a fan, but I really would love to I would love to like be part of his like act. Something. If we come back, I'll volunteer to be a guest soloist with his band for free if he could train me. So I think the following year we came back, the year of the second year. So I called him up, and he had a gig that was happening about a week or 2 before our Spanish Harlem gig in Puebla, which is outside of a little, maybe an hour or so outside of Mexico City. And so I arranged to, for the promoter to fly me down like a week and a half early, and I just paid my own expense as far as the extra hotel and trained with him. The gig got canceled, but I mean the gig got canceled before I flew down. But he said you can still come down and train with me. And so the whole week I went to this beat up gym, like, this barrio on the other side of Mexico City, like, and it was the real thing. There was like all these young people that were like aspiring wrestlers, some from the United States and most from Mexico. There was a 16-year-old girl. There was like a 21, 22-year-old guy from, I think, California that was already a professional but just coming to train. And the thing that I'll say is the training that goes into doing that, to do that without getting injured, is on par with any other martial art or athletic or sport, the training that goes into it. We know that the outcomes are predetermined and everything like that, and nobody really throws a brick over your head, But the training and the physicality is off the charts.
Okay.
And I think I lost 3 or 4 pounds in just like 1 week, and I couldn't walk for a couple of days. and so what you saw was after the training each day, him and this young woman, like a student of wrestling, would stay with me to teach me a routine that we were hoping to do during a performance. And so that was at that alligator roll where they taught me, like, how to do the pushing and the hitting and the chest out, and then like, jumping up and then getting the other wrestler's legs in a scissors, and then doing an alligator roll and flipping both of them. And that was probably like the 3rd or 4th time that we did that, and that one came out the best. But, that's one of my personal highlights. Like,
beside the Grammy.
after the birth of my daughters.
So, Mitch, you've played with the who's who of salsa and mambo, but you've also played with Paul Simon, David Byrne, and the Talking Heads, Blood, Sweat, and Tears. The question I have for you right now is, what was it like to record with Cyndi Lauper?
Well, I mean, each experience is wonderful. I mean, most of these people are like, they're in those situations, everybody's usually very nice. And at that time, I mean, for people that just know Cyndi Lauper from the Girls Just Want to Have Fun videos and back and then, or like it's like you see some of the old movies with Goldie Hawn and you think they're just like a ditzy character. They're smart as you can get. I mean, Cyndi Lauper is a super smart, super talented singer and composer. And the record that she did a record of American standards. She did At Last by Etta James and a whole bunch of Dionne Warwick songs. And a beautiful, I mean, people know now, a beautiful, beautiful voice. Because you can't always tell when somebody's singing some rock songs, like depending on the style, if they also have a gorgeous voice for other things. And Cyndi Lauper did a doo-wop song by, I forget, something and I forget the name of the band. It was a doo-wop band from the 50s, this tune called Stay. And she wanted to do it as a cha-cha. And so
the Dells,
no, not the Dells.
Not that one.
Something in the Zodiacs. I think, but it's called the tune's called "Stay." Stay just a little bit longer.
Oh, okay.
You know, I'm a terrible singer, but you know that's a fresh word. So she wanted to do it authentically, and they wound up calling a couple of guys from the New York Latin scene, American Latin scene, and I was one of the guys that got called, and we recorded that. And she wound up doing some concerts from that album. So she added myself and a couple of the other guys from that recording for some, we did a concert, couple of nights at the Beacon Theater, and which is actually, they videotaped it and it's on a DVD now. And then she did Girls Just Want to Have Fun and some of her other hits. And since we were there, we just wound up making up some horn parts. And so we done a bunch of stuff. And, it was, and the funny thing is, she was involved in the first WrestleMania, the Rock and Wrestling, I think the first WrestleMania. So I talked to her about that, and she was telling me stories about Captain Lou Albano and Hulk Hogan and stuff like that. And I mean, she probably thought I was like a little kid, but it was hilarious. It was great.
Yeah. Mitch, I'm gonna play another music selection. I want you to give us the scenario on that, and then I'm gonna let Eileen finish out. Okay, let's see if we can get this cut here. Wow. Hey, Mitch, I know you played 1,000 places, so I'm not going to put you on the spot. It's probably impossible for you to remember where that took place.
I know exactly where it was.
Oh, okay. Well,
I never did drugs. Earl.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, give us the clave on that situation then.
Okay. That was the Medellin Jazz Festival, Medellin, Colombia, with the amazing Mambo Legends Orchestra, the former musicians from the Tito Puente Orchestra, with my partners Jose Madera and Johnny Rodriguez, and it's the closest thing in the world to what the Tito Puente, Machito, and Tito Rodriguez Orchestra was like. And we were invited to play. We don't play that often. It's a large budget. It's a super. To fly 20 people to around the world. It's prohibiting. But we were invited to the Medellin Jazz Festival. Was 2016 or 2000?
Call from.
Who is that?
Eileen.
Okay,
Sorry.
no problem. That was the Medellin Jazz Festival, and that we were playing. That was during my solo in the arrangement of Tito Puente's Dance Mania, one of his most famous songs. To think that Tito wrote that in the 50s, and it's the hippest Latin jazz instrumental in the world. And so, that was from the Medellin Jazz Festival with the Mambo Legends Orchestra.
Wow. Eileen, back to you.
Okay, well, I'd like to talk about your association with Eddie Torres,
Sure.
how you became acquainted with him, and how you were selected to be the musical director, business manager, et cetera, of that tremendous CD that he did.
At the Mambo Kings, Eddie Torres and his Mambo Kings Orchestra.
Yes.
So I started to play with Tito in 1976, and Eddie was coming around. This is before him and Maria were married, and he would come around and dance, and I remember, I forget which exact year, but in the late 70s he came and he basically introduced himself to Tito and asked Tito. He said, I would love to choreograph some of your music, and Tito, like, sure, kid, whatever, But to make a long story short, he did, and Tito loved it, and he wound up inviting Eddie to do some shows with us because Tito loved the dance. He was a dancer himself back when he was younger, and he loved the whole artistic thing of the dance and the music, and so he would add Eddie on. Eddie and Maria Torres and Eddie's dance company on many, like some of the big shows like Madison Square Garden and some of the other things. There's some great videos of that on YouTube.
Yeah.
But obviously Tito is just so busy and is not going to be available every time Eddie wants to do something. So I'm one of the young guys in the band, and I'm pretty conscientious, and Eddie's coming around, and we're close in age, and we got friendly. And he approached me and says, Mitch, I have this idea. I want to start this dance company, and I'd love to maybe start an orchestra to accompany my choreography. So we did. I put it together. I hired the band. We rehearsed. We got some arrangers to do it. To make some of the arrangements, and basically it was a repertory company of a lot of the famous classic salsa tunes from the Palladium era and then the post-Palladium era. What was it, the Corso, the Casablanca, Casino 14, all that stuff. And it was very successful. And we actually started like Mambo nights at Sounds of Brazil, and it was Monday nights, and we did for 9 months. We built up a crowd, and we built up the band. We would do 2 sets. We'd play some tunes for dancing, and then Eddie's dance company would come out, and we'd do a little show at the end of each set. Then on Sundays, we were doing this matinee at Club Broadway 96 for an early crowd, and then we were doing private events and leading up to the CD that we did. And but like anything else, after a bunch of years dealing with, Eddie's dealing with a dance company, 10, 15, 20 dancers, and I'm dealing with a big band, so we're dealing with 30 people, coordinating everything. Things get crazy, and people, so Eddie started to taper that down, and he's getting really, really famous in the Mambo scene, and the Salsa Congress movement is really like in the 90s and 2000s really starting to come up. Actually, the 2000s, not the 1990s, and he starts traveling by himself with one partner to as a feature at the Salsa Congresses, and I'm traveling around the world with Tito. I'm traveling around the world with Mongo Santamaria. I'm traveling around the world, and then after the 2000s, I'm traveling around the world with Spanish Harlem and my own projects. So everything kind of dropped, and then I don't know, about 10 years ago, we kind of like reconnected, like nothing bad between us, but we kind of reconnected like business wise, and for some special events, we put the things together again. So a couple, like we did the Bachata Salsa Congress a few years ago in Washington, and where they can afford us, we were supposed to do the outdoors at Lincoln Center, the summer series at Lincoln Center last summer, but everything was canceled. I even signed a contract for it, but it was canceled because of the pandemic. But it's a large budget, and but when they want the real Eddie Torres, Mambo show with the real Eddie Torres Orchestra, we've done a couple times a year. And so, and we've maintained friends, and now, Eddie has his son and his daughter, Eddie Jr. and Nadia, they're amazing, amazing dancers carrying on the legacy. Eddie and Maria are still performing and teaching. And I say, Eddie is like some people, especially when I travel, they say, like, this started with Eddie. Eddie's the first one who'll say, none of this started with Eddie, but he's really like the link between the Palladium era and then the dancers of today. A lot of the famous dancers and dance teachers that are now on the scene now, they came out of Eddie's school. And so he's really like, when Eddie learned, he didn't learn on 1, on 2, on 3, on 4, on 6, on 7, whatever that stuff. He learned dancing to the conga, to the bongo, to the bass, to the piano, to the feel of the music. The brilliant thing that Eddie did was he found a way he studied it and broke it down and figured a way how to teach it to others using the mathematical system. But when people think that that's how it was done from the beginning, it wasn't. And that's from Eddie's mouth. And we joke about it sometimes, that sometimes I'll do some musicality clinics for dancers. And some of these salsa congresses or some of these dance companies, and some of the beginning dancers, like when I get lost, I don't know how to get back on. Stop counting. Stop trying to get back on. 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, 7. Listen to the bass. Listen to the conga. Listen to pick out something and just try to have your feet go with it. and because you're not gonna just, if you're thinking about the numbers, it's going to be harder. So the numbers is a good way for beginners to learn, the basic steps. But then, too many people rely on that instead of also then focusing on the soul of the music.
Right.
So it's not either or, but it's, you want the book smart and you want the street smart.
Well, of all of the people that you've played with, and the list is so lengthy, is there anyone that you always wanted to play with that you never had the chance to?
Yes. There's millions.
Okay.
I would have loved to play with the Horace Silver Quintet. I wasn't, Art Blake. Count Basie. Well, actually, we did a record with Count Basie and Tito Puente Orchestra, but I wasn't in the Count Basie band. Duke Ellington. I wish I could have been in my dreams, been on a bandstand with Clifford Brown. I'm not mentioning any Latin artists because I've been fortunate. If we go back in time, but I got a chance to be steady with Tito Puente. Well, Tito Rodriguez passed away before I got on the scene, but I got a chance to sub regularly with Machito, share the stage with Ray Barretto, Eddie Palmieri, Charlie Palmieri. Even a few years back, I recorded and toured with the bachata band Aventura. I didn't realize how popular they were until they were like the Beatles when we went to Colombia. It was amazing. There was at least hundreds of young pre-teen and teen girls when we came from the airport, just standing out with the Aventura fan club for the Romeo and a couple of the other guys that were the front of the group, but I would have loved to play with the Beatles. Richie. Oh, you know something? Because for me, Richie Havens. When I was growing up, I was a big fan of Richie Havens, and I saw Muddy Waters as a guest with Canned Heat. I love the blues, like the blues. I got a chance to play with Joe Cuba because I love Boogaloo. I got a chance to play with great merengue bands. It's not like one or the other. There's so, I wish I would have been a better classical musician so I could have played in the New York Philharmonic. You're always trying to I still practice etudes from my college days, from my classical etude book, just for general maintenance.
All righty. My last question is, how do you want to be remembered?
Well, I'm saying this with humility and humor. I'm not dead yet, so I don't want to be remembered yet. But I guess, just as a human being, I mean,
as a human being musician,
the best father that I could be to my daughters in the world. That comes first.
Wow.
And then, of course, the best to, just like a good-hearted person, like with the best of intentions. I still have a long way to go as a musician, but to be remembered as somebody that was very good at his craft, but authentic. And truthfully, I don't think I haven't thought in those terms up to this point, because I'm just looking to live another 150 years and try to continue to accomplish successful and happy stuff.
Okay, let's change the subject a little bit and just tell us about your influence and your infiltration into Asia. And you have a real prominence there. So can you tell us about that?
Like when I recorded a Latin Jazz Quartet CD a few years ago with amazing, well, they're not as young anymore, but the young musicians. I knew them since they were teenagers. Zakai Curtis, an amazing piano player, his brother Luquez Curtis, one of the greatest bass players in the world, and this amazing drummer from Puerto Rico now living in Brooklyn, Joel Mateo. And it basically kind of got me out more as a featured soloist, and I started traveling. Henry Knowles invited me to Thailand to help me, to do a little gig over there, and also the gig in Hong Kong. And in 2015, and just come relax for a couple of weeks, chill out, and we'll try to do some promotion for it and everything like that. And I wound up getting recommended to call a couple of well-known musicians in Thailand and a few other countries. And when they found out I was going to be in the area, they started adding me to some concerts. And I've made some really good friends there. And it turned out that in Thailand, the former king of Thailand was a saxophone and clarinet player.
Oh,
wow. So jazz was very big in Thailand.
Wow.
So I got friendly. One of the most beautiful people that I've met in my life, his name is Mr. Mr. Saxman. He's like the #1 smooth jazz saxophone player in the country. And he's involved with a lot of the festivals and stuff. And I sent him an email, like a blind email with a copy of my CD. And he responded, and he added me on to some concerts, and then one thing led to the next, and then other people see you with that, and then other people call you and the whole thing. And so right up to the pandemic last year, I was going like a couple of months out of the year and living over there and using the Bangkok as my base, and then letting people in Asia and other countries, because from Bangkok you could fly to Hong Kong, Singapore, Philippines, Indonesia for a couple $100. And I wound up being a guest at the Manila Jazz Festival. And in fact, they were honoring Joe Bataan, who is not technically Hispanic, even though he kind of was, grew up in the barrio in Spanish Harlem, but he's half Philippine and half African American. And so he was like popular over in the Philippines. And so he was over there, and they invited me to be a guest with him and a few other bands. And then I've been invited from basing myself for a couple of months in Thailand, then being invited to do some work in Singapore, in Indonesia, in Hong Kong, obviously before the problems in Hong Kong, and I'm trying to think, Taiwan, a couple of years ago in Taiwan. And, you find like there's a lot of great musicians. You don't always find, in the Latin jazz, which is really stylized, it's hard to sometimes find the people on the level that you're used to playing with. But the musicians are so nice, and they want to learn. And in some of the countries, they were more familiar with the music than others. I know in Thailand, there was a couple of bands that I kind of mentored and taught them some of our routines that we do in some of the New York Latin bands, along with some of my music. And they accompanied me to a couple of festivals. In 2019, I was a guest at the Hua Hin Jazz Festival, which is a resort a few hours outside of Bangkok. And there was a band that backed me up, that's did a good job. And but like I said, that's the people couldn't be nicer. The lifestyle is amazing. I could see why a lot of people from Europe or the Americas or Australia retire to some of those places. The dollar goes far. The food's amazing. The people are friendly, and the lifestyle is really good. And one of the other things that you saw the wrestling video, I wound up finding some great Muay Thai gyms, and wound up, up to last year, the pandemic, for a couple of months, I was there during the afternoons. About 3 times a week, I go to the Muay Thai gym and work out and train. With the Muay Thai is the martial art of Thailand, like American kickboxing. And I miss it. I really miss it. I felt healthier when I was doing it. Going to an afternoon, going to do some Muay Thai training, and then you come outside, and there's a little old lady with a fruit vendor selling fresh papaya or fresh watermelon, or a fresh pad thai, but not with additives, with herbs and spices. And I wound up, living really healthy, and I'm hoping to go back as soon as the pandemic, and then to miss some of my musical friends there. Although there's nothing like on the level of the guys that I play with here in New York, with the Mambo Legends, Spanish Harlem, Bronx Horns, Eileen Torres Orchestra, or my Latin Jazz Quartet. That's still on the there's no substitute for that. But that, there's pluses and minuses of the traveling and being a guest soloist, because it's not financially feasible to just play with, because in all these really famous bands that I play with, so many of the other musicians are also leaders in their own right. So, right. The budgets, exponentially go up, so it's not like the old days when I was playing with Tito and we were playing, 10 gigs a week, 7 days a week. And even the bands that weren't that famous were playing 4 or 5 days a week, 6, 7 gigs,
Yes, those wonderful days. Thank God that we're the age that we are, that we were able to live that and, tell others about the wonders of those days, what you would hear in live presentations that you would never hear on a recording. Yeah. And it was just the energy that the musicians absorbed from the dancers just made it phenomenally exciting to be in the presence of all this talent.
Yeah, Tito would pick out during one of our up-tempo mambos. It could be Mambo In or Baba Davatiri or something else, and there, there'd be some really good dancers, and he would pick out a dancer, and during his drum solo, he would play to the dance, the feet, and then if it was a dancer of a really high level, they would react to Tito's, blah, 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 And I remember you mentioned like places like the Corso or the Club Broadway or some of these other, Casino 14, there would be people in the front of the bandstand watching the band, watching the musicians. And then right behind them, there'd be dancers. And then in the back, there'd be people maybe just hanging out, listening from afar, kind of like just talking to each other. So you had people listening, watching, knew who the sidemen were. The dancers got everything they want, and then people that might have been on a first date and wanted to be in the back, like kind of in a more quiet area. It was something for everybody. There have been times where I've played with some famous bands at 1 or 2 salsa congresses, or even some discos, some clubs a few years back, and it didn't make a difference whether it was the most famous band in the world or Joe Schmo. The dancers were like if they were, it was like something. There would be more dancers when the DJ was playing like tracks, because they were practicing the choreographies that they had practiced.
Yeah,
and that's good for competition and everything like that. But it was like there wasn't the interaction. That's maybe I'm pinpointing a little too much because that doesn't always happen. But it's stuck out a few times. I actually remember at the Copacabana a couple of times. You know, in New York, I think they don't exist anymore. But a couple of times it happened where, you know, it could have been like a band with 20,000 Grammys, and then like they'll play like a commercial salsa tune on our break, and then some of the dancers will get up so they can practice some of their the steps that they learned in the last dance class. And, I'm like I said, I'm not being condescending, but they're both.
Yeah, no, it's very true. And, you know, one thing that I've mentioned a few times is that it always irked me when people would say, well, I don't care if there's a band there, you know, a DJ is just as good. And I told a friend of mine who was in a dance company, how would you like it if instead of us having you perform live tonight, we would just show your last video? And she's like, oh, well, yes, there's nothing like being able to do it live. And for dancers that haven't immersed themselves in the soul of the music, you're missing the best part of dancing, because you can adapt what you're doing to the energy, to the tempo of what's going on the bandstand. Whereas if you know the song, and believe me, I love a million songs that DJs play, believe me, I do. But
there are some great DJs like our friend Henry Knowles and a few like that don't just press buttons, but really know how to run the room and build a crowd. And then there are some people that just press buttons.
Yes, well, we hope that over time people will mature in their appreciation of the music and the musicians. This is one of the reasons Earl and I are doing this, because I think when people listen to someone like you talk about what life has been in the world of music and making the music that makes us so happy, I think a new perspective begins to form. So,
you know, it's funny that there used to be, like years ago in New York and some of the other big cities, you would go into a big hotel, and whether it's the Plaza Hotel or the Waldorf Astoria, whatever, and there would be a piano player and maybe a singer or a guitar player or a horn player in the lobby or in the lounge, like playing. You know, the Holiday Inns, you know, the Holiday Inn type bands. That doesn't exist anymore. In Asia, in Thailand, I did a bunch of playing. They still have like little duos and trios in a lot of the hotels, and they, you know, it's really wonderful. But I want to tell you, you mentioned about the DJ thing. There were two things I wanted to mention. When I started playing, all the clubs had DJs, but the DJs was the intimate, like the bands would take a break, and then the DJ would play music. In fact, in some of the clubs, these was like the 70s, the Saturday Night Fever days. We played where they filmed, you know, the Saturday Night Fever movie, and we would play the Latin music, and then on the break, the DJs would play the hustle.
Disco. Yeah, exactly. Yes.
You know, I mean, there was a period where if I heard "I Will Survive" one more time, I would float. You know, now it's nostalgic. The other thing I want to say is I heard a comedian on TV on the Comedy Channel the other day. It was a female comedian, and she was joking. She was like I said, Henry Knowles is a great friend of mine. So there are some DJs that I'm really friendly with. But she made a comment. She says, you know, why do girls, they look to like want to like go out, like they're attracted to a DJ, you know, because he's up there like spinning the records, you know. They didn't, you know, they're playing a record, you know, they're playing somebody else's music. And she said that would be like going up to the valet at the front of a fancy like event and wanting to go out with the guy driving the Mercedes-Benz to the spot. That's not his car.
Right.
I fell off the couch. Now, like I said, I'm friendly with like a lot of DJs, and there's, you know, there's wonderful, but it used to be both. It wasn't like, and of course the promoters and the dance studios, the expense of hiring one person to play your event, or weddings and bar mitzvahs and sweet 16s and, you know, quinceañeras all used to have live music.
Yeah.
Now it's, of course, recorded.
Yeah.
But and it has to do with budget and expense.
Yes, it does.
But the thing you mentioned about the dancers, sometimes we did a show with Eddie Torres a couple of years ago in New Jersey. It was a special event, and there was a dance team, and they wanted to. Eddie was trying to get them to dance like I knew their song, and so like we knew their routine. I mapped it out, and they were so nervous. They had never danced did their choreography with a live band because they were so scared it wouldn't be just like the record. But it turned out, like I said, don't worry, I have a lot of experience doing that. I mathematically mapped up everything from their choreography from the record. I made the cuts and the edits and the live music. But so many dancers have never experienced that because they're worried that it won't be. And there are some bands that they've danced to that have messed up. And like I tell the musicians when we work with Eddie Torres, you can play a wrong note. I mean, I hope you don't, but if you play a wrong note, you play out of tune. You make a mistake. The only thing that's non-negotiable is we can't be one beat off from beginning to end. We make a mistake. The timing, the mathematics, have to be
right
from the end. Now Eddie Torres and people like him, DeLille Thomas, Eddie Torres, and Maria, and people of that ilk, Frank Well. If a band would make a mistake, they have enough experience to ad lib and improvise.
Yes.
But most of the dancers don't know how to improvise if they get off their choreography. So the one thing that I'm very strict about when I do things with the dancers is making sure that no matter what happens with the band, the counting is exactly to their choreography because they're relying on us. Yeah. And that I learned with Tito. We used to accompany Freddie, the Palladium, the Mambo Aces, the Freddie Rios and Mike Ramos, and I think we did some things with Cuban Pete and a few other people, like people that Eddie Torres learned from, and we used to accompany them. But all those shows were live, so that was my training ground.
Well, this has been fascinating, just as I knew it would, because you've had such a rich, lively, exciting career. You've brought so much joy and happiness into our lives from your participation with all these great bands. We all thank you for everything that you've given to us because it enriches our lives and it makes our mood elevated to a higher, happier level. And so on behalf of the people that I know are listening today, I want to say thank you, and I'm going to leave it with Earl.
Wow, that's really sweet. That's really special.
Yeah. Mitch, you have no idea how much I love big band mambo.
Yeah, it's great.
And you happen to be a part of my favorite bands of all time.
Thank you.
In salsa. I want to thank you for coming on to the show.
Right.
You are awesome. I want to take the time out to thank Eileen Torres for the great job she's been doing, co-hosting the show. The ratings have gone up since she's come on the show. And
people should know that Eileen, for many years ago, has been a promoter of this culture. Music, dance, arts, when she was based in Washington, D.C., I think you're associated with the Kennedy Center. And, this, most people might be listening today don't realize that, but she's had a lifelong affair with promoting this culture in general.
Yeah, yes, she has. She taught me everything I know about salsa. She's my mentor. I will not hesitate to let people know that. She changed my whole life, basically. My whole life has changed since I really got into salsa.
Cool.
And I thank you for the job she did. And Mitch, I want to thank you so much for coming on to the show.
Cool.
I'm telling all my friends that I grew up with, can you believe I'm talking to Mitch Frohman? They're like,
no.
You're awesome, man. Thank you so much for coming on. But I want to get you to come on my sports show.
We got to do the sports show. we got stories, and I want to hear about your stories. I have stories, and we'll bring some Muay Thai videos in there.
Yeah.
We'll talk about the Bronx Spartans. I led the team in receiving 1969, 1970, and also blocking.
Beautiful.
The only reason why I ran into my old coach a couple of years ago, and he had the playbooks, and he showed me statistics, and my favorite play was the tight end delay, because I could hit the defensive end, hit him a couple of counts, and he thinks it's a run play, and then I let him slip by me, and then I go out for about 10 yards, catch a ball over the middle, and the whole middle's open, so I got to hit somebody and catch something. My favorite play was the tight end delay.
Double your pleasure.
Awesome.
It's still I think it's still my favorite play.
Thank you so much, Mitch, for coming on to the show. I really appreciate it. And hopefully one day we can have you back down here playing at a DCBX or a Step on Salsa event.
That would be wonderful.
Okay. Thank you so much, Rich. Thank you, Eileen.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
All right.